Autosomal aneuploidy is a case when the cell doesn't contain a multiple of 23 chromosome, and that way it will become aneuploid cells. And aneuploidy can occur in any chromosome. However, only 13, 18, and 21st chromosome can be presented in live births. Otherwise, the chromosomes aneuploidy will not be in a live birth. For example, Trisomy 16 is quite common. However, unfortunately, the baby is not viable and the birth isn't live. And the most common example of aneuploidy is Down syndrome, and the frequency is 1 out of 800 live births. Down syndrome first described by Landon Down, who described the disease in 1866. Since then, there is a great body of research conducted on Down syndrome, and one of the biggest findings we have now is that the incidence of Down syndrome will vastly increase with maternal age. For instance, after 45-year-old maternal age, the risk can be as high as 5%. Probability of having a baby with Down syndrome is as high as 5%. The explanation is fairly simple in this case, because a woman is born with all of her maternal egg cells, which are held in a dormant state, and during the dormant state they may accumulate damage from influences, from external factors, and the damage occurs in cellular proteins that govern the meiosis, which at the end may lead to non-disjunction, and non-disjunctions, of course, here may result in trisomy 21 and Down syndrome. What's the role of paternal age in all of this? There are great speculations that paternal age plays a role in development of Down syndrome. However, there is no steady evidence that will point on paternal age. The famous Columbia University research conducted in 2003 collected data from births of infants from 1983 to 1997. Approximately 3,400 cases were examined, and it was conducted in New York State. And paternal age was found that it also may influence somewhat the results of having the baby with Down syndrome. So when baby is born with Down syndrome, there is a chance of mental retardation, and the degree of mental retardation may vary significantly. Again, the people with Down syndrome may present with significantly high IQ, and there were cases described in literature that a person diagnosed with Down syndrome was able to enter and complete the college and be successful in professional employment. However, overall, the patients or people with Down syndrome may present with relatively low IQ. So physical features will include low nasal bridge, epicantral folds will be present, and protruding tongue, muscle tone will be poor. Patients with Down syndrome may present with increased risk of heart disease, congenital heart disease. It's important to screen the baby for congenital heart disease. can have GI disorders and may have a higher risk of developing leukemia. And again, because of the development of the health sciences nowadays, the management of Down syndrome and consequences is much more elaborate, and people who diagnosed with Down syndrome or were born with Down syndrome may have much higher quality of life and enjoy themselves compared to several decades ago. Trisomy 13 and 18 are other trisomies that can be present in live births, but unfortunately the patients with trisomy 13 and 18 will present with much more significant and severe complications than person with trisomy 21. The relativity of having more, or the probability of having more profound deficits is much higher, and the mental retardation can be present as well as the physical disorders may be present. And again, other chromosomal trisomies will not survive to term. And again, trisomy 16 is the most common one in spontaneous abortions, and it's never seen in live births. Partial trisomies also may occur when extra portion of chromosome is present in each cell. So when we have a partial trisomy, the consequences of it's not as severe as complete trisomies. Remember what we were saying before talking about complete trisomies, that most of them do not result in live birth, and the ones that result in live birth, the patients may present with significant disorders. But in this case, when we're talking about partial trisomy, it's not as severe as in complete trisomies. And individuals who affected with this are considered chromosomal mosaic. That means that the body has several cell lines, and by that we mean that by cell lines differences, we mean that each cell line has a different karyotype. And mosaics, of course, formed by early mitotic non-disjunction, and which can occur in one embryo cell but not in other embryo cells. So again, the take-home message in here that partial trisomy isn't as severe, and partial trisomy is only a portion of chromosome is present in the cell. So there is something left. It's not complete trisomy. So again, remember the statement or the sentence or that says that more genetic material is better than less. So missing a chromosome is worse case scenario than having a part of chromosome. Sex chromosome aneuploidy is similar to autosomic chromosome aneuploidy. However, the consequences are less severe. For example, when we're having abnormality related to Y chromosome, the consequences may be relatively insignificant. The explanation is the small amount of genetic material carried by Y chromosome, and it's approximately 40 genes located on it. When we're having X chromosome aneuploidies, and they may be more serious consequences. For instance, when we have no X chromosome, only Y chromosome, chances are survival non-existent. The zygote obviously won't survive if there is no X chromosome. So instead of 2 X chromosomes, some females may have 3 X chromosomes or even 4 X chromosomes. There's a term describing this phenomenon, they call it meta-female. So what being meta-female is means from the physical standpoint? This may represent no physical abnormalities, obviously visible, but sometime the patient, the female with 3 chromosomes, may have sterility, menstrual irregularity, abnormal menstrual cycle, and some mental retardation. But again, being a meta-female, it's not a verdict for all of these abnormalities or all of these disorders, and obviously mental retardation, it's not always seen, or I can say that it's seen very seldom. On the other hand, when the number of X chromosome increases, the chances of developing disorders, especially mental retardation, is increasing. And with 5 chromosomes, the chances are even higher. So we can say that the presentation of the disorders will increase and will be more severe with each additional X chromosome. Turner syndrome is a disorder when there is only 1 X chromosome presence. So with only 1 X chromosome, the life and survival is still possible, but again, without X chromosome, the survival is impossible. So when individual who has only 45 chromosome in Turner syndrome and it's only 1 X chromosome, there is no conjoined or corresponding, conjoined, not a correct word here, corresponding X chromosome or Y chromosome. The gender of the individual will be female, obviously, and but in this case, the lady will be presenting with absence of ovaries and sterility. The short height and webbing of the neck is one of the characteristic signs for this, and patients may have some edema. They can have cortication of aorta. Newborns will have edema in lower extremities, and when I said the ovaries are absent, it's actually gonadal streaks, like unformed ovaries. It's like undeveloped ovaries. They are not fertile, but still they still can be susceptible to neoplasm, still can develop neoplasm, and this should be monitored and should be taken care of if there is a suspicion for cancer. Turner syndrome will have a relatively high mortality rate presented as spontaneous abortion, but again, survival rate is relatively high, and the individual will present with all the symptoms described here. One last thing I want to say, X chromosome will be inherited from mother. The paternal X chromosome will not be present. So basically father in this case doesn't donate anything, any material. So Turner syndrome is possible with only one X chromosomes. Klinefelter syndrome is another sex chromosome aneuploidy. Patient may have at least 2 X chromosome and 1 Y chromosome. So basically it's the excess of X chromosomes. So patient will have male appearance, and karyotype can be described as 47 XXY karyotype, and basically the patient will have all the consequences of having excess in X chromosomes. Some of the individuals will have symptoms of sterility. They will have still testicles, but they won't be developed. Patient may have gynecomastia, long limbs, and sparse body hair. Some patients may have 3 X chromosomes or even 4 X chromosomes, but again, with more and more X chromosomes, the abnormalities rate will increase. In addition to losing or gaining a chromosome, sometimes parts of chromosome can be lost or interchanged or duplicated when the sex cells are formed, and the arrangement may be altered because of this. Although again, there is small amount of genetic material involved in this, so the consequences may not be as serious as when we are having changes that involve the entire chromosome. And sometimes in these cases, when we have this type of disorder, we may not even notice any representation in the patient or in the individual. The smaller the part that was involved in the chromosome, the less chances we have usually of it being resulting in some kind of disorder. On the other hand, if abnormalities of the chromosome are present, they can produce a serious disease in some cases, and also may influence the children. And again, if it's some type of sex transfer trait, and it may show up in the next generation. So deletion is very simple process to describe it. When chromosome loses part of the DNA, and it results in deletion. So we have a gamete with deletion, and probability of uniting with another gamete with deletion is very low. So usually the gamete with deletion unites with a gamete with a normal gamete. So one chromosome in this zygote will be normal, okay, with the normal complement genes, and one will be with missing genes, because in this case many genes may be lost in deletion. We may have big consequences, serious consequences, because we may have genes that influencing and governing vital function, and the consequences again will be serious. Inversion is another type of alteration in chromosomal structure, when the rearrangement occurs of the segment of chromosome. Basically, that segment flips around and reversed end to end. The deletion can result in kridushas. Translocation can be described as an exchange of genetic material between chromosomes. And what happens, the genetic material from one chromosome, a segment of chromosome is transferred to another. And between many types of translocation, it's worth to mention Robertsonian translocation. In this case, long arms of two chromosomes, they would fuse at the centromere and they will form single chromosome. Robertsonian translocation can happen in chromosomes 13, 14, 15, 21 and 22 for the reason because short arms of these chromosomes are very small, tiny, and they really don't have any essential genetic material. So when this happens, when the translocation happens, in Robertsonian case, the short arms are lost completely during the next cell divisions. So in Robertsonian translocation, can happen that there is loss of no important genetic material, and your individual will have only 45 chromosomes in each cell, and they will present as a normal individual. They won't present with any disorder because, again, there is no essential material lost in this case. On the other hand, their offspring can have monosomies and trisomies. Common Robertsonian translocation that I want to talk about is the fusion of the arms of chromosome 21 and 14, and when the baby is born from someone who has this, can receive an extra copy of the long arm of chromosome 21. And of course, when we're talking about chromosome 21, we are talking about Down syndrome, and yes, the baby will develop Down syndrome. So to talk about this more, Robertsonian translocations are responsible for quite significant number. Ring chromosome occur when the telomeres of each chromosomal arm have been deleted and the broken arm joined together and form a ring. The drastic consequence of this is the ring chromosome can actually trigger series of breakage and fusion bridge events, which will cause continuous DNA breakage. It's like a chain reaction and recombination of the chromosomal material. So because of this, the ring by itself, it's not a big danger, but because of the chain reactions, it can cause. The patients with ring syndrome may display very diverse symptoms resulting from DNA breakage and recombination. Basically, deletions of the chromosomal material will occur, duplications, and the diverse presentation is just very, very different. But they have something in common, and doesn't matter how they present. The patients with congenital ring chromosomes, they show failure to thrive. And failure to thrive is a consequence of the fact that cells may not proliferate normally, and that will result in failure to thrive. And there is some school of thought that suggests that mitotic instability of the ring will prevent somatic cells again to proliferate normally. Basically, again, ring by itself, it's not a big danger, but the consequences or that happens after formation of the ring that may cause diverse presentation of the symptoms, and the main thing is that patients will present with failure to thrive. Chromosomal breakage occurs, again, like in previously was said, physiological mechanisms trying to repair the break, but unfortunate part of this that the break would heal differently than original chromosome, and again, like in ring chromosome case, this may result in diverse presentation of different abnormalities. However, this may be very mild, or this can be very drastic and very, very unfortunate for the individual with this. So what can cause it? And ionizing radiation is notorious for this, chemicals, viruses, but again, this may affect chromosome in autosomal structures and versus sex cells, but regardless, this breakage, when it happens in a chromosome, the healing part unfortunately results of distortion of the structure of the chromosome and distortion of the DNA, and what I'm trying to say that healing isn't always good because it continues to alter the structure of the chromosome. Duplication is a relatively rare occurrence in alterations in chromosomal structure. What happens? The repeated gene or gene sequence occurs, and let's say a duplication occurred. The consequences, physical consequences, should be much less severe than, let's say, deletion. How to explain it? Again, we are going back to the beginning of the lecture when we were saying that more genetic material is much better than less. So when we are deleting something, of course, having a viable infant or viable fetus is much more difficult than adding something like in Trisomy 21. So one of the examples of duplications, what can happen again in the short arm of chromosome 5, and you all remember that it was the Klinefelter Syndrome, and actually found a French speaker to say it. And again, it's Klinefelter. And in Klinefelter Syndrome, we remember that not only mental retardation was happening, but several physical abnormalities, such as microcephaly. If duplication occurs in this short arm of chromosome 5, there will be no physical presentation, but the infant still will have infant still will present with mental retardation. So if it's duplication in the short arm of chromosome 5, fragile sites are sites that the breaks or gaps within chromosome, and actually those can be seen via microscope when the cells are cultured or developed. And there is really no evidence that this may be related to some disorder in most of the fragile sites. However, you may already heard about fragile chromosome X syndrome or fragile X syndrome. So most important feature of this is presentation of mental retardation. It's fairly prevalent in population. 1 in 4,000 males will develop it, and 1 in 8,000 female. Why there is such a distinct ratio between male and female, 4,000 versus 8,000? This can be explained by the fact that females have 2 X chromosomes versus males have only 1. So in fragile X chromosome, females will inherit the mutation. They do not necessarily express the disease, but the male who inherits the disease will express the condition because the male has, again, only 1 chromosome. So that's why the prevalence is 2 times more in males versus females. And again, the female who carries fragile X syndrome or may not present it herself, but can pass it to the next generation. So to finish this statement or this slide, again, most of the fragile sites will not be presenting any relation to the disease, only fragile X chromosome. So when fragile X chromosome occurs, it occurs on the long side of X chromosome, will be related to mental retardation, and again, it's one of the most common genetic disorders, and it will occur, it will be second compared to Down syndrome. And again, the highlight of this slide that males will have higher occurrence because there is only 1 X chromosome.